Loud. Okay, we're starting off on page 35, where we left off last with the chapter Anxiety Disorders, a conversation with Dr. Dicken Bettinger, psychologist, author, and board member of 3PGC. Dr. Dicken Bettinger says, I started my career teaching high school students. I was only 22, and I had so many students talking to me about their personal problems that at one point, the head of the guidance counselors came to me and said, what are you doing? You're talking to more of our kids with problems than we are. I love that. Just started a passion for me to find out what people could learn in order to have an easier time in life. I also was trying to learn that for myself because at times I could get extremely anxious. One time a friend said to me, I don't think the problem is what you think it is. I think the real problem is that you're such a worrier. Woo-hoo. I said, no, I'm not worrying. And he said, well, what do you think it is? I said, Dickens said, I'm just thinking about something that's really important. And he said, well, what would you call thinking that makes a person really anxious? It was the first time I realized how much of my thinking created anxiety. So I went back to school and got my master's in counseling psychology and continued looking for what I could share with people that would help them with feeling upset or anxious. Then I went back to school and I got my doctorate and trained as a psychologist. Hannah Studley, the author of the book, says, ask Dickens, what did you see was the biggest problem? Dickens says, it seemed like a good number of the people who I was working with were coming to me because they felt so uncomfortable with their anxiety. And so for 10 years, I worked as a clinical psychologist. Yale University recently counted that there were 450 different theoretical approaches in therapy. I got my training in the cognitive fields and fields dealing with feelings, behavioral, existential, and humanistic psychology. And it was complicated. There were so many different causes proposed as the source of the problems people had when they had anxiety. This is gold. Hannah asks, how did that change when you met Sid Banks? Dickens says, I can remember the first time I heard Sid Banks teaching that everything you think, you will feel. Everything you think, you will feel. And we live in this world of thought from the moment we're born until we die. And we're just experiencing our own thinking. And that's the one source, the only source. I had never heard anybody in the field of psychology say that. That was a huge statement. To say 100% of what you're experiencing, no matter what your situation, no matter who you are, and no matter what you've been diagnosed with, 100% of what you're experiencing is coming from your own thinking. Very few people were aware of that fact at that time. The fact that what we think we experience, the fact that what we think we experience, the fact that the power of thought creates feelings and experience. I can remember my very first training in the principles, and I started thinking. As a psychologist, I had a lot of meetings, and I had a very important meeting coming up a week later. And here I was sitting in this beautiful place in a beautiful hotel room, thinking about something that's not even happening. And I'm getting so anxious. It's unbelievable. I think it was probably the very first time that I suddenly woke up as if from a bad dream, which literally was what I was doing. I woke up and I went, oh my gosh, it's how I'm thinking about this meeting that's causing my anxiety. It's not the meeting. I stopped thinking about it and my anxiety went away. I couldn't believe it. Then, all through the day, I would catch myself thinking in ways that created some degree of anxiety or tension, and I wouldn't analyze it. I would think there was something wrong. I would just come back to the present moment. I wouldn't think there was something wrong. I would not just come back to the present moment, leave it alone, and wake up from the bad dream. Thank God it was just a dream. And you go on with your day. Well, that was the first thought I had about the principles. Isn't that wild? I mean, you all know about Dickens. He talks about it. It's, on the airwaves. It's no secret. This is a guy who used to go to bed with a notebook so that every time he woke up from a dream, he could record it and analyze it. So if someone with such a habit, such a strong habit like that, can actually realize that that's not the direction. Analyzing dreams, analyzing anxious thoughts, working on problems is the wrong direction. If he can do it, it's like anybody can. Dickon has given me the absolute realization that no matter how tough a client I get, and I've had some toughies, right? Elaine can
Yes.
attest to this.
Yes.
Elaine's had some toughies I've heard about. They can wake up also. Nobody is immune. Nobody is left out of being able to wake up. So, Mary, do you want to read from here? We're halfway down on 36. Elaine doesn't have her book.
I can read, except for right now I need to get a charger because my phone is going to die. So hang on one second.
Go get your charger, right? I'll continue reading to the bottom.
Okay.
Of 36. So, CS, that's Hannah. Hannah Hannah asked Dickon, that's very powerful and so different to what is taught in universities. What was your next insight? Dickon says, well, the second insight I had was that I already had well-being. And nobody had told me that in all my years of training, that every single human being has perfect well-being. Reminds me of Bill Pettit when he said all of his years of medical school, he never learned about mental wellness. He only learned about mental illness. Medical school, residency, training to be a psychiatrist, he learned about mental wellness from Sid with a 9th grade education. I mean, you just gotta love it, right? So, all my years of training that every single human being has perfect well-being. And when their head clears of the thoughts that create tension, stress, and upset, we see that we already have everything we need to be at peace, to be happy, and to feel love. I couldn't believe it. I was working so hard on myself, meditating 4 hours a day, working on 5 dreams a night. There it is. Doing cognitive therapy, reframing my thought content, doing affirmations, doing structured journals, unstructured journals, and reading several psychology books a week. And all of a sudden I was like, why am I working so hard to become to gain my well-being when I already have it? Face palm, right? And all I have to do is relax into it. I think probably 60% 60% of the anxiety I had disappeared just from having those two insights. Like immediately, I just didn't think about my anxiety. I didn't add more thinking to it. In fact, I added less thinking to it. And so it would pass quicker, which is called being resilient. So I became much more resilient. My anxiety would last 5 minutes instead of an hour. 5 minutes instead of an hour. He gained 55 minutes from this. Just two big insights. That's a huge difference, he says. I became so excited that I wanted to put it to the test with my clients. I don't see.
I'm here.
I'm just, oh, you want to keep going? You want to go from here, Mary?
Yeah, I can go
only
from here.
see your light.
I know my phone is charging, so I can't have it. I can't show you my face because it's on the charger. But
Okay.
so
I could keep going if you want, unless you feel like reading. Up
no,
to you.
I'll read for a little bit. So Hannah
Okay, great.
Says, can I ask, what did your colleagues make of your insights? Did you talk to any other therapists about it? DB, they thought it was just the same as cognitive psychology, which I had done for a very long time with my clients, which is tell me exactly what you're thinking in this situation, and then we'll talk about and analyze the content of your thinking and try to help you see the flaw in it and then reframe it. That's a lot of work. It's exhausting. And it's focusing on content, not waking up out of the content. It's doing more thinking rather than less thinking. It's also based on the assumption that anxiety or stress are bad or wrong, or at least that's how my clients felt. They hated feeling that way, but more and more I saw it was just thoughts coming through, and it's normal to have those thoughts and feelings, and you don't have to focus on them, think about them, analyze them, and judge them. So it would just come up through uneventfully. Moments of anxiety thinking are not moments of anxious thinking are nothing. It's natural. It's not a problem. Hannah, so did your relationship with anxiety change? DB, yes. Anxiety went from being the enemy to almost being a friend, and that alone was huge. Anxiety now, an invitation to disengage from everything I was thinking and just relax in the present moment, which takes no effort and feels good. My head would clear of my anxious thinking if I didn't give it any attention. If I didn't believe those thoughts to be true, they would just pass naturally, which they did. It stopped being in any way a problem. And I started seeing that happening for client after client after client. When you believe you've got to think about it and you've got to figure out a solution of what to do, then you'll feel more anxious. So now you've got to counter it with some kind of technique, right? That's me, just by the way. You have to figure out how to figure out what to do. Hannah, yes, and once you have to, and once you have made anxiety into a thing, it would be irresponsible not to search for techniques to fix it. The traditional approach gets so complicated. Can you give me an example from your clinical practice how this simple understanding changed things for one of your clients? DB, sure. I had someone who came to me with diagnosis of general anxiety disorder. It was so bad for him that he couldn't be in a room with more than one person. I asked him, how do you go shopping? He said, I don't. I live with my brother. And if I need something at a store, I make a list and he picks it up from me. I said, well, why do you think you're so anxious? He said, well, it's not really being anxious. I had a psychologist who reframed it as being shy. So I'm just a shy person. I said, where do you think your shyness comes from? In another therapy I was in, I realized that it's genetic. And the reason why I'm this way is because my dad was this way and my grandfather was this way. So it's genetic. So I I was told there's nothing that I can do about it. I didn't come to have you help me do anything about it. I just want help accepting the fact that I'll be this way for the rest of my life, and I want to develop some coping skills. Can you help me with that? I said, well, would you consider that you've been wrong about your feelings, where your feelings come from? Would you consider the possibility that there's another more scientific way of looking at this? You're no different from anyone else. You are someone who thinks all day long like everybody else, and what you think will create what you feel. And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, it's genetic. What are you talking about? There's something about learning the principles that is hard for people to shake, because it's hard for them to see they are not, for them to see they are the thinker. But once people begin to be aware of the connection between what they're thinking and what they're feeling, it then becomes hard to say there isn't a direct link. So pretty soon, like many of my clients, he started catching himself thinking in a way that would create this strong anxiety. And then in that moment, he has a choice: keep thinking or stop thinking about it. In other words, come back to the present moment. The thoughts can still come through, but you're not paying attention to them. You're not listening to them. You're not believing them. You're not thinking they're true. Later, he told me he was walking down the street and he saw a drugstore. He remembered a few things that he wanted to ask his brother to get. And then he said, Dickon, I'm standing there in the middle of the street in front of the drugstore. And right then, I wasn't feeling anxious. I took one step toward the store and I said to myself, I'm not feeling anxious. I took another step and another step. And in this drugstore, there was an entranceway where there were newspapers. I opened up the first door and I stepped in and I'm looking around. And then I see something I need right there in front of me. Oh my gosh, I opened the door and looked in, but then I realized there was all these people in there and I freaked out. I got really anxious. So I stepped back and I picked up the newspaper and I pretended I was reading it so I didn't seem like somebody who's crazy. And then I realized I was holding the newspaper upside down. I remembered when you said that if it's thought, if you're in the present moment, as soon as your thinking passes, your feelings will change and it will dissipate. That happened, Dickon. My anxiety level came down as I was just standing there, not paying attention to my thinking. So I opened the door up and I walked over and grabbed the first thing and had this thought that made me feel elated. I'm shopping. This was the first time this guy had been shopping as an adult. He said to himself, I'm shopping. And he grabs a little basket and he walks around and he's picking up stuff. I'm shopping. Oh my gosh, hi. And he said hello to somebody. I'm shopping. He then told me the most interesting part. As he got to the cashier, I said, I saw she was having a rough day. I could see that she was caught up in a lot of thinking. And I said to myself, well, if I can help her become more present, she won't be so bad. So I started socializing. He said, Dickon, pretty soon we were laughing. I helped someone. Now this was monumental. He was also he was always the problem in need of help. There was no way he was present enough to see other people caught up in thought. Now he was present, he was aware, and it was the beginning of a massive change in this guy's life. A few sessions later, he came in and I swear he was jumping up and down with joy. He said, Dickon, I am not a shy person. I just think that way sometimes, but so what? In the next session, he came in and he looked exhausted. And I said, what's going on? He said, well, I've been going to parties every night. And I said, well, that's what happens. Well, what's happened to your anxieties? He said, well, I'm an anxious person when I get there, but I don't pay attention to it and it goes away. And then I just talk to people and I'm having fun and I'm making up for lost time. CS, that's amazing. This is the principles in action. Exactly. This was a massive change in that man's life. His brother couldn't believe it. What's happened to my disabled brother? Yes, we are told there are many different types of anxieties. For example, driving anxiety, health anxiety, social anxiety, etc. As you know, Sydney Banks said that there need only be one genetic mental illness and an inability to see the role of thought. So would you say that all these different anxieties are basically the same thing? DB, yes, because it all comes from the same misunderstanding. I worked with a 10-year-old girl who was so anxious that she couldn't function in school. She would sort of curl up and shake and couldn't participate. So she told her mother, you have to get her into a long-term therapy right away. Take her out of school, get her into intensive therapy. She can't because she's too emotionally disturbed to attend school. She was only 10, so we agreed to do a short, excuse me, short session. So in the first session, I got on Zoom. She's in England and I'm in USA, and I see the mom and I started talking to her, but the little girl is hiding. So I started, hi, good to see you. How's it going? I thought your daughter was going to be joining us. And she pointed behind her. I kept talking. Kids can sense whether you're safe by your tone of voice. So she was hearing my tone of voice, calm, relaxed, and kind. So pretty soon I saw her eyes come up over her mother's shoulder. I said, oh, hi, you must be so-and-so. And she popped back down again. But as she popped back up, and so I started talking to just her eyes. How old are you? What do you like to do? And she said she liked unicorns. We talked for 20 minutes about unicorns. Pretty soon her head was completely up and we were talking and talking about unicorns collections that she has in her room, which ones were her favorite. And she was teaching me about unicorns. If you touch the unicorn's horn, colorful butterflies fly out of it. I didn't know that. So I was getting an education about unicorns. Mm-hmm. So you're 25 minutes into the session, and I said to them, do you notice how much fun we're having now? The mother replied, yeah, I'm a little surprised. This is unlike anything else she's done. And I said, well, we are all able to have fun when we're not thinking anxious thoughts. Our well-being just comes out. And that's what's happening right now for both of us. And you are just like me. Both of us at times get thinky thoughts that create anxiety because it's created by our thinking and nothing else. That was my first session, 25 minutes of building rapport and getting to know her and then pointing her toward the truth. It's normal to have all kinds of feelings. It makes a big difference if you understand where your feelings are coming from. That's it for a session.
Beautiful. Anybody want to chime in, say anything? And I could do more reading at this point. Give your voice a rest, Mary.
Yeah, no, that'd be great if you could, because my throat is getting dry. But I did want to say that while I was reading it, I mean, I could visualize that was me as a child, and it's all about hereditary genetics, because that was my mom when she was a child, and and that was, went on for, as a child, but then went on for years as an adult, until just recently. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I might have mentioned this too, in this group before. I grew up thinking I was shy, like it's a thing, because I remember my mother asking me, she had to fix her shoe or something, or walking somewhere in a park somewhere or something like that. And she asked me to ask this strange guy what time it was. And I was horrified. Ask a strange person what time it is? Are you kidding me? So from that moment on, she would introduce me to her friends as a shy girl. She's shy. And I realized after being around the principals long enough that was made up. There's no such thing as you just think you're shy. You get a label, whatever it is, anxious, shy, and that's who you think you are. So like you live up to, that was my experience. I just lived up to or down to that label.
Yeah.
Fascinating. All right, so here we go. her mom sent me an email a couple of days later and said she was sitting at breakfast and the daughter came downstairs and said to her mom, everybody has a thought factory inside them and is creating thoughts all day long so that we can have feelings out of the mouths of babes, right?
Mm.
Mom was delighted. She noticed the daughter was already less anxious. We have a second half-hour session. This time, she's sitting side by side with her mom. She's not behind her. And toward the end of the session, she said, Dickon, I have a question for you. Who runs the factory? I really wanted to empower her as a thinker. So I said, you do. It's your thought factory. Creating these thoughts so that you can then feel. And if you don't like what you're creating, you can let it go.
Yep.
And the thought factory will create something different and better. Oh, she liked that. And in our third session, a half-hour session, she said, Dickon, one more question. She asked, who owns the thought factory? Oh my gosh. Now I knew she came from a religious family, so I said, well, God does. I could have said it's built into the very essence of life energy, but in her understanding of life, that made perfect sense. In other words, there's nothing wrong with what God is creating. I just have a choice because I have free will to decide which thoughts I want to keep creating. She was back in school and there was no anxiety problem at all. Beautiful, huh? Give a time check. Oh, we got a good 20 minutes. Okay. So Hannah says, wow, that's incredible. She could have faced a life of torment and disability. They were labeling this girl as disabled. And, that's one girl, one child. How many? And innocently so. It was all done innocently. Okay. But now we know better. Thank you, Sid Banks. So Dickens says, yes, it just took 3 half-hour sessions instead of a lifelong label of mental illness, diagnosis, and possibly years of therapy. Woo! That's the power of pointing people toward what's true, what's fundamental, that we're connected to a deeper well-being and wisdom that arises whenever our minds are quiet and open. These are not theories, they are facts. Before Sid Banks, psychology did not have principles that I know of. There were no principles, there were just theories, 450 different theories. But nobody said, here are the fundamental forces that generate every bit of human experience to make it simple and understandable. So one of the things you mentioned, which has kind of been a theme in what I've written in this book and the stories that I've collected, is that traditionally there seems to be multiple sources for why people are experiencing anxiety or discomfort because of trauma or family history, genetics, etc. What would you say about that? Dickens says, well, the present situation in the field of psychology is that it's my personality, my upbringing, my parenting, my genetics, there's a chemical imbalance, any number of things, any number of theoretical or hypothetical reasons for why people feel the way they do. That's why psychology is so complicated and becoming more and more so. Everybody has a different history, and if they have a different theory, they have different assumptions. And if they have different assumptions, they have different techniques that they need to utilize to try and help people cope with the fact that they have all these uncomfortable feelings. Now they have to develop a strategy that will help them deal with that better. It's exhausting. Principles understanding is based on the assumption you already have perfect well-being. You don't have to develop it. It's already developed because it's spiritual. It's not physical.
Mhm.
For years, yeah, I should say that again. You don't have to develop it. It's already developed because it's spiritual. It's not physical. For years, scientists at NASA, the North American Space Agency, studied the energy in the universe. And they discovered that if you look at everything that can be seen in physical form with instruments, like the very best, the most powerful subatomic microscopes, you can find anything that has been formed from the smallest to the largest. And if you add it all up, if you add all of that up, it's only 4% of the universe. 96% of the universe is formless energy. So when Sid Banks had his realization, his awakening, he realized that we're all connected to an infinite field of energy, most of which is invisible. But that field of energy is full of knowledge, because out of that formless energy, everything is created, including everything we feel and do from that field of formless creative energy, right?
Right.
That built into that field of energy is awareness. So everything that's created has a degree of awareness because it's made of awareness, and it has creative potential ones. There is no limit to what can be created. Isn't that something, huh? That's the unlimited potential that, we hear about in this community, mainly. Unlimited potential. So, got about 15 minutes. You want to say anything, ask each other a question? Mary, you want to read a little bit on page 42, or should I read?
I can read. I can read.
Great, Mary.
That's what Sid called the three principles. The power of thought is our creative potential. The power of consciousness is our capacity for awareness. The power of mind is the intelligence that knows how to guide what's created, knows how to guide human beings, so that when people become quiet, they're able to tap into a creative source that creates new and fresh thinking instead of the same old conditioned thinking that creates anxiety, tension, stress, or upset. Hannah, what if a client says to you that they can't find it or they are too damaged? Dickens, it's an innocent misunderstanding. It's built into us. It can't hurt and it can't be damaged. Hannah, what would you say if the one problem most people have? Dickens, the one problem people have is they don't understand where their experience comes from. But when we tap into the space within that's full of new and fresh, that's full of awakening, that's full of wisdom and well-being, that can guide us toward living a healthy, beautiful life, we understand. It's built into everyone. So that's how I see my clients, no matter who they are or what they come in with. Hannah, how has this understanding changed your practice? Dickens, it's changed dramatically for me as a psychologist. Instead of seeing hundreds of possible diagnoses of what's wrong, I see immediately what's right. I see what's right with people. I see you have a perfect well-being already. You just cover it up by getting caught up in believing the content of your worst thinking. Can I say that again? I see you have perfect well-being already. You just cover it up by getting caught up in believing the content of your worst thinking. And if you weren't doing that, you'd be walking around in well-being and you wouldn't be exhibiting any behaviors that would be labeled as mental illness. Hannah, it's so simple when you put it like that. So you mentioned for yourself that you didn't realize it was anxiety. I had the same experience. I never thought of myself as an anxious person until I understood how thought and consciousness work together. I was around the principles a few years before I started realizing that my own overthinking was actually anxiety. It's been such a freeing experience. Can I ask, how do you respond when someone tells you that they feel their anxiety is stuck or held in their body? Dickens. You could say there are only two emotions that human beings can have: fear or love. And you could say fear has many different flavors that can be held: sadness, anxiety, upset, judgment. As people let go of that thinking, which is just energy, in its true nature, energy expands. So any feelings of being held in temporary because of some point, all forms go back into the field of expansive energy. So in healthy psychological understanding, or in spiritual understanding, they say our very core, our very nature, the 96% of us, our true self is expansive. And the experience of expansiveness is peace, joy, and love. You don't have to label them. It's just feels good when you expand. And the greatest human problem is that we have contracted feelings and they last for periods of time. So there's nothing wrong with feeling sad or anxious or angry or hurt if it's a passing thought and it doesn't define us and we're not identified with it.
Mm.
Hannah, yes, I used to feel constricted all the time, mentally and physically. I just had an insight from what you were saying. I had this feeling that when it feels held or stuck, it's actually the feeling of the energy or adrenaline or cortisol that we are actually feeling, which is the result of prolonged anxiety. But once we see it for what it is, the energy can dissipate and we expand. Dickens, yes, like once we see our hand is meant to be opened and it doesn't take energy, and it's also meant to close sometimes, which at times is very helpful, but we weren't meant to walk around clenching our fists or our bodies. And if we clench our hand for too long, it'll start to hurt. If you clench it for longer, it'll cut off the circulation and create all sorts of problems. So you could say the problem is not making a fist. The problem is clenching or holding on to it. So when I see clients, I know if they're having trouble psychologically, they're holding on too tight. I know it for a fact. And I know that if they realize I'm the one doing the holding, it's not life making me do this, then as soon as you realize that, you let it go. One time a client asked me, how do you open your hand? I said, I don't know. I just know I can do it. I just know anyone can do it. And I know that people do it all the time, whether they know how they do it or not. And it's the same with you. You can let go of your thinking. You don't need to know how it works. And when you're present, your thoughts are flowing again, and they pass over. It's temporary. So fear is a temporary thought that comes and goes. That was Sid Banks' very first insight. Every bit of his insecurities was a temporary thought, created illusion. So fear and anxiety are an illusion. Love is real because it's always here. It's natural. It's like the clouds are an illusion. They come and go. And when they part, there's blue sky of presence. The sun is always there, radiant, expanding, shining. Light has been used as a metaphor for our true nature for centuries in all different cultures. People have intuited the truth of our true nature, which is light and love. Expansive energy and well-being is our true nature. And our psychological difficulty is just a misunderstanding that leads us to do a lot of holding on to a thought that creates our suffering. But it's not necessary. It's what we do because we have a misunderstanding insight, correct the misunderstanding. I've done training for
Beautiful.
doctors working in hospitals. What time is it? Okay. Working in hospitals as they deal with a lot of people having anxiety attacks. They don't really know what to tell them other than you have a deep-rooted psychological problem that you're going to have to go into therapy and find out what's causing them to have this anxiety and dig through your past. In the meantime, I'll give you some medication and that will help you calm down. But when people begin to learn that panic is a function of our thinking, they can calm themselves down naturally. How do you work with people who have panic attacks, for example? Dickens. When I work with these people, they usually have thoughts come into their heads out of the blue that creates some fear. So they go, oh no, here it comes. Oh no, here it comes. I don't want to feel this way. Oh, I hate this. I show them right now, you're having thoughts that create hate and judgment and more fear. And the way we are built to work is when we have fearful thoughts, it starts producing adrenaline so we can be ready to fight and flight. Now, what understanding does is when people begin to feel anxiety, they come back to the present and do less thinking rather than lean into it to do even more anxious thinking. So it undoes it and the adrenaline starts to dissipate and people start feeling better pretty quickly. It's just like when we go to the movies. If there's something that happened in the movie, we get scared. That's a panic attack without us adding more thinking to it. But people go, oh, I'm only feeling this way because of the movie. That's nothing. There's nothing wrong with me. They know it'll pass. I'll just stop thinking about it. I'll start feeling better. People who have panic attacks don't do that. They don't go, oh, there's nothing wrong, or it'll pass, or it's just a bunch of thoughts. I'll leave it alone. But once they have an understanding, they start doing exactly that. So I worked with one woman who had been to 3 psychologists and psychiatrists for her panic attacks and had tried tons of medications. She was having them every day. We had one session and she never had another panic attack again. She has the start of a panic attack, which is normal, but it doesn't turn into anything now. A psychologist told me once that the average person has startled thoughts 4 times a day, which creates some adrenaline. But if you don't feed it and know it's just a passing thought, then it's not who you are, it's temporarily and it passes. And this begins when they have insight into this understanding. Hannah, Dickens, thank you so much. Your experience and wisdoms are amazing. And I know that there are so many people whose lives have been transformed by your deeply generous teaching. Thank you.
Beautiful. We could talk a little bit. We've got another 5 minutes or so, but I'm going to stop the recording after I just say we got up to page 44. And next Wednesday, we're going to start with the next chapter titled Anxiety/Nightmare Disorder by a client in Argentina. So she speaks about her label of anxiety and what it was like, the difference in her world when she learned about the principles and was exposed to Sid Banks' work and what he brought to the world. So I'm going to end the recording. We could stay on and chat a bit. Yes.